And on today's show, we welcome filmmaker Matt Dooley to talk about the last game and the end of Oakland baseball.
You are Locked On MLB Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, baseball fans. Welcome to a Locked On MLB, Locked On A's crossover. This is the daily podcast. We talk about all the Major League Baseball or the Sacramento A's all season long. I'm your host, Paul Francis Sullivan. Please call me Sully. Follow us at Locked On MLB Pods on Twitter or whatever they're calling it these days, and on Instagram. I'm at Sully Baseball Podcast on Instagram. But the best way to go is just post comments right here on the YouTubes. Today's episode is brought to you by our new friends at Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONMLB at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. So today we are going to be talking to filmmaker Matt Dooley, who made a film about the last game, which was about the final game at the Oakland Coliseum. He's a diehard A's fan and wanted to capture a little bit of the character of A's fans and the experiences of the final game. Before we go on, I want to answer the trivia question, which were who were the only two Tampa Bay Rays to ever win 20 games in a season? Useless Trucker guessed Price and Shields. Close. You got one of them right. But the Robert L. 2000 got it right. It was David Price and Blake Snell, who are their Cy Young Award winners as well. So good job there. All right. With no further ado, we're going to go into our conversation with filmmaker Matt Dooley and talking about the last game. Matt Dooley, welcome to the podcast, and thanks so much for documenting that wonderfully sad but wonderful day in Oakland last fall.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on, Sully. I'm glad to be on the show and talking about the athletics and baseball, and yeah, definitely a difficult time to be an A's fan. But with our project, we hope to kind of bring this story to light and keep it going throughout this season.
Okay, so let me first of all let me ask a little bit about you. We're gonna jump face first into the last game, of course. But you said you're from the East Bay. You from were you born and raised in the East Bay?
Yeah, born and raised, born in Hayward, and grew up around there and played Little League around the East Bay. And so always was kind of an Oakland A's fan just by default, by the area, and grew up in the 2000s and the Moneyball era. So that's kind of my first kind of memories and association with the A's.
Who was your first guy? Who was your first big dude on the A's?
I think right when I was kind of turning around 10, 9, 10, when I was in Little League, it was definitely Barry Zito. I wasn't
Hmm.
left-handed, but I always really loved a curveball, his curveball. I thought it's probably the best curveball I've seen to this day. I know
Oh
some
yeah.
people might throw out Clayton Kershaw, and he's got a good one too. But
Mhm.
yeah, growing up in the 2000s, Barry Zito always liked his style and his pitch location and everything he had going on. So yeah, definitely in the Moneyball A's, Zito was kind of my guy when I was growing up.
Yeah, I'm old enough to remember Billy Ball with Billy Martin and everything. I'm a little too young to remember these A's, the 72 A's that I have behind me there. But yeah, I remember. I mean, even not. I mean, I moved to the Bay Area in the late '80s in time to see the Bash Brothers and Stewart and Eckersley and everything like that. But even before that, there was always something about the A's that seemed a little strange and a little offbeat. And their history, even going back to Connie Mack, their history has always been um a little bit bizarre, whether it was Finley, whether it was Billy Ball, whether it was the Bash Brothers or Moneyball. There's always been something a little bit funky about them, and right down to the uniforms, or right down to their great look. And I've always been fascinated by the A's. And the earliest A's star I remember was either Mitchell Page or probably Ricky, because Ricky came around when I was about 7 years old. So I do remember Ricky. But Do you remember Ricky at all, or was he like an obscure figure from the past, like Jimmy Fox or Lefty Grove?
I know that Ricky probably played. I want to say he played into the 2000s when he was like
Oh
on the
yeah.
Indians or the White Sox or something. I think he was on the White Sox for his last year, if I'm remembering that correctly.
Well,
But
I hate to correct you, but he played for the Red Sox and then the Dodgers, his final
oh,
two
there
years.
you go. Okay, one of
Of
the Sox.
all the team, the White Sox were one of the few teams. He never played for a Chicago team. That was a weird thing, but
Oh wow.
he,
Well,
yeah.
yeah, definitely. That era of baseball for some of the older players, was a little bit out of my knowledge when I was growing up. I think, kind of the players I was aware of at that time was, people like Derek Jeter, uh,
Mhm.
uh, David Ortiz later, coming up, Alex Rodriguez, of course, even Miguel Cabrera going back to those Marlins World Series that they won in the early 2000s, which I feel like no one talks about anymore. But yeah, kind of that era of players, and then later on, I learned about Ricky, and then of course dove deeper into the A's. The great players of the '70s. You had an all-time team, an all-time dynasty, really in the '70s, with the rotation and the hitters that they had with Reggie Jackson and Catfish Hunter and all the great players that they had of that era. That again, I feel like is to go back to your point. One, a team that's not really talked about too much in terms of all-time greats, and then two, the culture of the A's, kind of like what you're saying, is always offbeat, always strange. Charles Finley, something we talk about in the documentary is how the A's history of ownership has always been a little wacky. I mean, you go back to Connie Mack, who managed the team for what I think was 50 years or something, and he
Yeah.
became the ultimate, for better or for worse, he became the ultimate owner of that team and manager of that team. And then they moved to
By
Kansas.
the end, it was for worse. By the end, his sons, I've made this analogy before, the sons were reenacting the film Weekend at Bernie's by the time it was over there. He should have, if he had quit in the mid 30s and they kept things going, I've made this point before, the A's still would have been the team of Philadelphia, and the Phillies would have been the team that started bouncing around all creation. So unless we forget Arnold Johnson, when he owned the A's in Kansas City, he also owned Yankee Stadium. So it behooved him to keep the turnstiles moving at Yankee Stadium. So there's a whole period of time where the A's were basically a minor league team to the Yankees. Anytime the Yankees had a broken down veteran, they'd ship them to Kansas City, and the Kansas City A's would ship young players to the Yankees to keep the team afloat. And among the players they sent over there for a broken down Billy Martin, a broken down Don Larson, they picked up a World Series MVP in Ralph Terry. And oh, yeah, Roger Maris was another one. It was, but the minute he died and Charlie Finley took over, the uh, the the express from Kansas City to New York ended, and they just also happened to put together a dynasty.
Yeah, it was a very interesting mix, especially moving over from Kansas City. The first year, I remember we interviewed some guys who were fans since the first season in '68, and you had
Mhm.
Joe DiMaggio as like a hitting coach on the team, and it was such an odd mishmash of players. But it carried on, and they really found a lot of success expanding that franchise into Oakland, and of course, Charles Finley, say what you will about his later years, another owner that probably pushed things too far, but you sometimes you can't argue with the results. Got 3 World Series, but I think eventually his greed maybe got the best of him at the end of that A's dynasty in the '70s, and he kind of invented free agency by maybe
I
screwing over Kathy Hunter and a lot of players.
Yeah. Well, I hate to ask this of you. We'll get into the movie for a second, but I hate to ask you, of all of the heartbreaking Octobers that you endured, which one sticks the most? I imagine I have an idea of what it could be, but let me know your thought.
It's an interesting one because it's a game that I don't think is brought up anymore, a playoff game, because the team that beat us didn't actually end up winning the World Series. They went all the way to the World Series and they lost to our rivals, the Giants. And I'm talking about the Kansas City Oakland A's wild card game from 2014. And,
Mhm.
I think it's one of the all time great playoff games, but I think it's forgotten because eventually that team, as I said, never won, right? So it's kind of
Right.
swept away. But epic, 11, 12 inning game, losing in a walk-off. And the thing that stuck up for me is I really remember the vibe of that summer. And it's something that, actually, when I started this documentary project, it was a story that I wanted to put in there because for me personally, it was kind of the tipping point for my baseball fandom in terms of how much of my heart I put into the process every season. Because from an outsider's perspective, if you say you put all this love and devotion to something that has a 132 chance of making you happy at the end of the year, that's a pretty insane, thing to say, that 31 out of 32 times you're going to end up miserable and defeated. And to do that year after year after year, well, that makes you a fanatic, right?
Right.
So in 2014, we had this slogan, which was all in. We traded Yoenis Cespedes, our superstar hitter, for a year rental of John Lester from the Red Sox and Johnny Gomes from the Red Sox in order to get a quote unquote World Series rotation. And then John Lester gave up too many runs in the wild card game, and the Royals eventually came back and won. And after that point, we're in another rebuilding period. So, for me, kind of growing up, I was right around college age during that time. It was kind of a emotional awakening to how brutal sports can be when you invest so much in it. And I saw that cycle that had been talked about so much, and kind of what we talk about in the documentary is what A's fans endure, which is this constant cycle. You talk about the Kansas City A's being the farm system for the Yankees. Well, the Oakland A's, certainly for the past 20, 30 years, you could argue, have been the farm system for a lot of these big market teams. And just seeing that cycle over and over again, and not continuing to invest in players, for me personally, was just pretty devastating. And so I kind of took a step back from my fandom during 2014, and this all kind of resurfaced when the A's announced their move to Vegas.
All right. Now, when we come back, I want to talk a little bit about the ultimate heartbreak that A's fans had and how you responded with your camera. Hey, if you're looking for a snack that's both nutritious and delicious, crack into a good source of protein with wonderful pistachios. You've seen them, and you know what? They live up to the name. Wonderful pistachios. They are one of the high protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fuller longer. Now, this is my kind. I got the out of the shell, lightly salted pistachios. Those are the really good ones for me. But there's all sorts of varieties out there, and many, many different flavors of pistachio. And if you want them in the nut, great. If you want them out of the nut like I do, even perfect. And it's a complete protein, providing all 9 essential amino acids. And those little green wonders pack a protein punch. And the no shell are the fast and go eats for me. But if you like to take them out of the shell, I don't judge. There's so many different kinds there. Now, you got to get snackin or get crackin with a snack that packs a protein punch. Say that 3 times fast. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. It's funny you mentioned 2014. That was the year I was doing the podcast, and I had become friends with Sean Doolittle and his wife Erin. And I went to many games that I would say, hey, can I take me and my sons to the game? And tickets would be left there. And that team, I got to know, I watched them every day. And it's funny, my dad, may he rest in peace, was the biggest Giants fan in the world. And he was very pessimistic about the Giants, and I was very optimistic about the A's. And it's funny, the Cespedes for Lester trade pissed off every Red Sox fan I knew, and pissed off every A's fan I knew. It was kind of no one was happy with that. And it's funny, there was a vibe that was different after Cespedes was gone. And the offense fell apart. And Lester did okay, but then, it was the biggest mistake that Melvin ever did. They didn't lift him in the 8th inning and just let the runners run like ragged off of him. And I don't know why they didn't do that, because they had a good bullpen that year. It made no sense to me that they didn't, take him out. But Well, the ultimate heartbreak happened when the Fishers basically ran the team into the ground. There were no heroes in this situation, but the the absolute insanity of not only they're going to move. Okay, I mean, I don't want them to move, obviously, but if that happens, it happens. But to then the self-imposed exile to a minor league stadium in Sacramento while a supposed stadium is being built, it was just such a body slam to every A's fan that I knew. To forget about the heartbreak of Jeremy Giambi not sliding. This makes all of that look like tiddlywinks right now. So, what was the moment that you realized, you, an experienced filmmaker, you realized I need to pick up my camera and make something and express your anguish through video?
Yeah, I think right around the time, our first interview took place in December of 2023, and right at the end of 2023, I think is when rumblings of going to Vegas started to get more serious. There were some, releases and really kind of commentary about it really happening. And, when we started filming, it wasn't official yet. It was kind of gearing up, but they hadn't made the announcement yet. I think they made the announcement in April of 2024. So by the time we were kind of already underway in our documentary, filming opening day and all this sort of stuff, the cell protests that were going on, that kind of changed the narrative of our film from, something that was talking about just A's memories to chronicling this last season, almost in a sense. And our documentary talks about all the different decades of A's fandom, but it really changed the trajectory of what we were looking at. So, 2023, things started to get more serious. Picked up a camera, picked up a crew, started talking to any A's fan that would let us into their house and show us their collection and memories, and tried to search for people from each decade to represent the memories and the stories of the A's from every era, and really came together in the last couple months, and got it all put together and released. And yeah, it was just kind of a process, an evolution process, like most documentaries are. You start out with an idea, and then the situation changes and you have to adapt to it. But certainly I think the announcement of the move um, was something that was projected, but it's still shocking, right? It's kind of like some of the A's fans referred to it as like a death in the family. And even though someone might be sick, and then they're hanging on for months, when that death finally happens, it's still a shocking event. It's still something that's earth shaking for people. And so I think a lot of the expression in our documentary talks about what that process is like, and it's not over. That's something that maybe will never be healed, will never be filled. For a lot of folks, they're not going to follow the team, and they're actually done with baseball. They think that this is such a you know such a wrong against the fandom, that they don't want to be complicit with what MLB kind of
Right.
allowed to happen. So you get a lot of very divisive reactions, and I think the fans are totally fair to feel some of the stuff that they've expressed over the last 2 years.
I remember that I'm going through research on a piece I was working on that had nothing to do with the A's, but it was an article written in 1959, and the Dodgers played the White Sox in the World Series that year, and they were the Los Angeles Dodgers. They were the Brooklyn Dodgers up until the end of the '57 season, and then their second year in LA, they went to the World Series, and the reporter was interviewing old Brooklyn Dodger fans, saying, "Are you rooting for your Dodgers? They're in LA and in the World Series." And the overwhelming response was, "We're all rooting for the White Sox." And you stop and think that the that's how bad it is. That's how the betrayal is. And I do think there's a connection between the Oakland A's and the Brooklyn Dodgers that people may not understand. That Brooklyn had this sort of, I don't want to say inferiority complex, but it had the little brother quality to New York. New York was the big, strong, uh, behemoth that everyone recognized, and Brooklyn was kind of the more blue collar neighborhoods and people feeling pride of where they lived. And as someone who lived in the Bay Area for a long, long time, I didn't understand the difference between, oh, they're both San Francisco teams, right? I didn't understand the difference between living in the East Bay and living in San Francisco. And like Brooklyn, they're connected with a bridge, and geographically they're very close, but psychologically they're not. And I can't tell you how many people wrote to me last year when I was doing Locked On A's saying, well, why can't A's fans just become Giant fans? Why can't they just, and I said, you don't understand. You don't understand what it means for the East Bay. But and like with Brooklyn, they had one team. Now all the teams are away from the East Bay. And yes, I know the Warriors are just playing across the bridge, but it's a different thing. It's a different entity. And it's something that I find personally so cruel about how unceremoniously unnecessary it was to rip the A's away the way they did.
Yeah, I think a lot of the resentment comes from just the methodology of how it happened. I think
Hmm.
if there was a stadium agreement in place in Las Vegas and shovels were in the ground and there was a clear direction and plan that made sense, I think, that might buy 10 or 20% more of these fans kind of onto your side, right? But ultimately, the facts are the facts where the team is gone and they're going to be playing in that minor league stadium for 3 years or who knows how long. Some folks think it's going to be longer.
Yeah,
Um,
I do.
and if the taxpayers, if you're a taxpayer in Las Vegas, you're probably looking at that stadium and thinking, I don't want, another dollar on my taxes for something that I'm probably not going to go to because it's not a very large market. And I think one of the interesting things, just from a business standpoint, is football potentially works in a sport like Vegas because Vegas is a destination city. You go there for a conference, you go there for a holiday, you go there for 3 or 4 days. And so you're going to see one event, which is the football game, right? So football only has, I think, was it now 18 games a season? They keep on
Mhm.
changing the number, but 18 games a season, and baseball is 162. So you divide that, maybe 81 home games. 81's quite a lot to fill a stadium, on a weekday or weekend, and it just seems like there's no clear direction. And I think if fans had, truly seen the organization put money behind the players, behind the stadium in Oakland. And of course, Oakland City definitely has its own problems and share of problems. So they're not completely blameless in the situation. But I think now what you're seeing with the A's being the second biggest spenders in the offseason is kind of a slap in the face when you had so many potentially great teams and great players like Matt Chapman, who's now on the Giants, who was a stud for the A's and could have been and could have stayed,
Yeah.
and Mark Simeon, who could have stayed. You had that next generation of talent that you just did not invest in. And now the fact that you're pushing so much money in the offseason directly after leaving, I think is a sour taste in fans' opinions.
Also, and I've made this point before on the show, but the the fact of the matter is baseball is a local sport. Interest of baseball is local. It doesn't have the same national pull that football has. And so I've been in the Bay Area when both the Giants and the A's have been great, and the interest is off the charts. When they're bad, they're not paying attention to the other teams. Same, I live in Los Angeles County right now. Right now, everyone's Dodger, 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 Dodger. I would remember when there was in the early 2010s when the Dodgers stunk or were not a playoff team. Not a lot of interest in the Dodgers. Same thing when I lived in New York in the early 1990s. Believe it or not, the Yankees and Mets were both bad, and there were lots of available seats at Yankee Stadium and Shea Stadium. And um, you have a transplanted fan base there. The stadium's not going to be located where lots of people live, and we found with the Florida teams and with a lesser degree the Arizona that when you have a population that is recently transplanted from other locations, you don't have that diehard fandom that you need in baseball. There are more Yankee and Met fans in Florida than there are Marlin fans, and you need to be in a population where it's deeply rooted. Like I live in California. I know lots of people from New England who are still Red Sox fans here. Lots of New Yorkers are Yankee or Met fans here. Everyone I know from the Baltimore area or the Beltway are all Orioles fans. They're almost never National fans because they grew up with the Orioles. Or people I know from Chicago are White Sox or Cub fans. They stick with their fandom. And so to say, okay, embrace this new team that been ripped from another city, I don't see it happening, and I don't see tourism being the great boon. If you have a chance to see Celine Dion, or if you have a chance to see the A's play the Brewers, I wonder which one is going to get the big crowd. So I don't buy. I've never bought that Vegas was a good site. If it has to work, it can work as maybe as an expansion, but even then, I don't think it's a good baseball market. And I think they're going to find out the hard way that I think they're better off staying in Sacramento and building a stadium there because at least there's a deeper fan base there, and maybe they can siphon off people from the East Bay and Pleasanton and Stockton or something like that. But I don't know. I find this to be a potential disaster.
Yeah, it remains to be seen what's going to happen. There's some other documentaries, really great teams that are continuing to film, fan experiences and opinions going forward. So, our story kind of ends at the last game, but the story continues in real life, right? So it's going to be very interesting to see where it goes. I think for a lot of people, they're off the train of baseball, and they're taking their memories and hanging them on the coat rack, right? And just enjoying them, enjoying the World Series victories they had in the 80s, enjoying the great times they had in the 2000s, the really great, magical seasons we had in the 2010s with the Bernie Lean and all the great characters like Coco Crisp and Grant Balfour that we had in the 2010s. And, just you're in a little time capsule. I think a lot of fans are going to kind of live that way. And, you can equate it to other teams that moved, right? It's a generational thing. Maybe there'll be a time when, the Oakland A's are looked at the same way the Brooklyn Dodgers are looked at, as like a black and white kind of thing of the past. It's
The
just,
St. Louis Browns or the Boston Braves, that sort of thing too.
right. Yeah. And I think in baseball, I think the A's will now officially be the only team to have moved 4 times in their franchise history.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty, difficult development. And my heart goes out to A's fans because at least, again, speaking from my experience in 2014, I kind of got off of the train of baseball fandom. I used to watch every single game. I used to know all the stats, all the players, the minor league players. What our trades and stuff were, and I think seeing how it's affected other people, I can only imagine how difficult it is when your life almost revolves around, a certain team, right? And this happens to you. And I think that's one thing we talk about in the documentary is one of the hardest lessons to learn about sports is that you don't control that thing that you love. And so, I think it's a difficult lesson to learn.
When we get back in our final segment, I do want to talk to you about the documentary and how it's being received. You ever check into your bank account and wonder, hey, where'd all my money go? Between dining out and online shopping, entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in. It's your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place so you stop just managing your money and you start building wealth. When I started using Monarch, I realized how much I was spending on things like food delivery and streaming services. Now I budget smarter and I save more. Instead of juggling multiple apps, I can use Monarch to check my finances and track spending and even plan long-term goals. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever because you can track shared personal accounts, set goals, stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONMLB at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONMLB for half off your first year. I got to give credit to my mom. My mom was the one who alerted me of the existence of your documentary because she sent me she sent me a clip from a clipping from the San Jose Mercury News saying this
Oh
looks
wow.
interesting because guy did a Locked On A's episode from the final game, and so I was walking around with my camera in the final game, and it was oh man, it was I hadn't cried like that since I saw Up. That was yeah, that was something. So, tell people about the film and how it's being received and how people are reacting to it.
Certainly. Well, The Last Game is the name of our documentary. We just premiered in Castro Valley, locally here in the East Bay, last week, and had a full house of A's fans there. And the reception has been tremendous. You know, it's been everything we hoped for. It's been a cathartic experience for a lot of people. And I think, you know, when we started this process, we weren't necessarily looking for, you know, awards or anything. We just wanted to be able to have a story, a piece of media that people could point to and say, you know, that's how I feel, or that, you know, made me happy because it brought back some good memories of my childhood, or, you know, when I was supporting the A's and they were winning World Series. So that really was, you know, kind of the emotional point that we wanted to ground our story and our documentary in. And in that point, I'm really happy to see that it's being received so well, and that it's fulfilling that duty. And we're looking to do more theater showings in the Bay Area. And our documentary talks about the history of the A's. So the A's have been in Oakland for 57 years, and we kind of go decade by decade, interviewing these super fans of the A's from each era. So people who have been fans since the first game in '68, all through their winning seasons in the '70s and the '80s through the '90s. We talk about, you know, some of the complex issues surrounding the A's in terms of like their Coliseum Stadium situation. And then we move our way through the 2000s and 2010s, and eventually we hit the stories of the 2020s and them, you know, being eventually shuffled out to Vegas. So it's a 57-year retelling of the highlights of the Oakland A's, but through the memories of the fans and the voices of the fans. And I think that's what makes our documentary, The Last Game, unique, because there's a lot of sports documentaries out there that do a really great job of telling the team's history or a specific World Series or a specific game, interviewing players and mayors and, you know, high important figures. But I think for the story of the A's, at least in the last 3, 4, 5 years, has been the story of the fans, has been the story of their voice being heard, the everyman. And for a lot of fans, I think this represents their voice being assimilated and projected in a unified way, and sharing feelings with other people that they might not have been able to express themselves. So our story is for the fans. It's told by the fans, and we think it, you know, really does a really good job at retelling the history of the A's and why this team is special to the culture of the East Bay.
That's fantastic, and I can't wait to see it myself. I have yet to see it, but it's baseball got a little less unusual. It lost a little bit of its weirdness when the A's left Oakland, but you know, I am wherever they land. I actually think they're going to just stay in Sacramento. I do not believe they're going to Las Vegas. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong, and I'll eat crow. But if they end up in Sacramento or they end up in Las Vegas, I do hope they succeed because I'm a baseball fan first, and I want to have all the franchises succeed. That being said, I've been telling people the last few years, please come to an A's game because when you went to an Oakland A's game, even if there was only 7 to 10,000 people there, there were 7 to 10,000 people who loved the A's. It was like a you know you didn't go there because it was cool. You didn't go there to be seen. You didn't go. It was like baseball. Describe it as baseball in a Bunsen burner. It just sort of boiled it down to its basics. They love their team. They'll go to a lousy stadium that's falling apart, that's tarped off. That the players, the nanosecond they ask for more than minimum wage, they get traded off for pennies on the dollar. And yet the fans showed up with their flags and their drums and the banners and everyone having shirts from different. This one's wearing a Reggie shirt. This one wears a Canseco shirt. This one's wearing a Giambi, wearing a Sean Doolittle. Doesn't matter. All these players. It's a kaleidoscope. And if you miss that, I honestly feel badly for you And I try to capture that when I did my thing on the final game. But you're getting this big time, and Matt Dooley, I wish you all the success with this, and I hope it gets the attention it deserves.
Thank you very much. And yeah, there's something special about the A's. There's something magical about the A's. There always will be. And we're going to continue to push our documentary forward. You can follow us on social media, on Instagram at The Last Game Doc, and we'll have more updates for more theater showings and hopefully get it out to a bigger audience soon.
All right, and that's going to lead us to the trivia question. And please leave the answers down here in the YouTube comments section here. And the trivia question is this: assuming the A's are not coming back to Oakland, and I think that ship has sailed, what pitcher got the decision for the A's final postseason victory? The last Oakland A's postseason game victory. What pitcher got the victory? Don't you answer, Matt. It's for everyone else to put down here in the comments. We'll talk about the next time there. So follow us at Locked On MLB Pods on Twitter or whatever they're calling it these days. Same thing for Locked On A's. I am at Sully Baseball Podcast on Instagram. But most importantly, follow Locked On MLB and Locked On A's right here as part of the Locked On Podcast Network. On behalf of Matt Dooley, the producer director, correct? That's the correct title. Producer director of The Last Game. This has been a Locked On MLB, Locked On A's crossover. I am your host, Paul Francis Sullivan. Please call me Sully.